Eddard Stark stood on the balcony of Maegor's Holdfast with his hands braced against the cold stone parapet, gazing across the torchlit expanse of the Red Keep's grounds. The sky over King's Landing had settled into a bruised purple, the last light of the setting sun fading behind the westerly spires of the city. He felt as though he stood on the cusp of a precipice. Just days ago, he had believed himself to be caretaker of a dying king's will, a man duty-bound to preserve the integrity of the Iron Throne for Robert's rightful heir. But the world as he knew it had pivoted violently. Duty, loyalty, honor, those old foundations had shifted under his feet. He closed his eyes, recalling the swirl of events that had led here. Robert Baratheon, his friend and king, the man who had pulled him from the quiet fields of the north into the hornet's nest of King's Landing, was dead. A hunting accident, they had called it, but Eddard harbored deep suspicions that gnawed at him each time he set eyes on the Lannisters. Robert had always been too trusting of Cersei's manipulations, too eager to drown his troubles in wine and hunts. And so, when that final boar's tusk had gored him, Robert had left the realm in chaos. An unsteady throne, children whose parentage Eddard believed to be false, and a queen who seized for power in the void left by her husband's death. Ned's sense of honor had compelled him to do the unthinkable. Confront Cersei, warn her that he knew her children were Jaime's. He had expected an exodus of the Lannisters from the city, or at least some desperate negotiation. Instead, swift retribution had come for him when Cersei's men seized power. At the last moment, a swirl of guards had forced Ned to his knees in the Great Hall. The memory of that day coiled around his heart even now. The mortal fear, the dread for his daughter's safety, the realization that he had underestimated the cunning and cruelty of the queen. All of it weighed on his spirit. And then had come the twist beyond any imagining. Cersei had not demanded his head. She had not even had him thrown immediately into the Black Cells. She had forced him to hear a proposition that would change the Seven Kingdoms forever. Grand Maester Pycelle had stood at her side, reading a royal decree with quavering voice. The gist of the bargain was simple. If Eddard Stark pledged his fealty to the crown and agreed to wed Cersei, uniting House Stark and House Lannister under the aegis of the Iron Throne, then Sansa and Arya would be spared, and the North would enjoy renewed favor and independence in certain internal affairs. If he refused, the names of the threats had been too horrifying to repeat. In those early moments, Ned's sense of honor had nearly made him spit back their proposal. He had knelt, unbroken, even though knights in golden cloaks pressed swords to his neck. But then, with a tremor in his voice, Grand Maester Pycelle had recited a line about sending Sansa to Casterly Rock as a permanent ward. Arya, the more rebellious child, would vanish into some Lannister-held keep, or perhaps worse. The queen had looked into his eyes, her lips curved in a faint, mocking smile. By then, the cunning that had so often eluded Robert's notice was plain to Ned. She was not offering him a chance to walk away with his life. She was offering him a chance to keep his family's blood off the stones. She was offering an alliance that would preserve the Stark name, albeit in a twisted shape, so that all the realm would see the North and the Iron Throne bound by marriage. He could still taste the bitter tang of the vow he had been forced to give. For the sake of his children, for the sake of thousands of Northerners who would perish in an open civil war, for the sake of the realm, he had set his honor aside. He had agreed to marry Cersei Lannister. Now the hush of the night spread out before him, and Ned heard the faint music coming from the Great Hall, revelers indulging in a half-hearted feast to mark this bizarre union. The wedding had taken place behind thick walls, under the watchful gaze of the Kingsguard and Lannister soldiers. There had been no riotous applause, no joyous beating of drums. It had been a spectacle of forced smiles and anxious courtiers, and Ned had waded through it in a trance, his mind half absent from the new reality. Yet he knew each step had consequences. As the new Lord Protector of the realm, a title that Cersei had insisted upon awarding him, he was now expected to keep the peace, to broker deals with discontented lords, to ensure the North remained loyal. Cersei, for her part, had gained a valuable figurehead, a beloved hero of Robert's rebellion, an upright symbol of virtue whose mere presence could silence those who spoke out too loudly against her. Lord Stark, A timid voice at his shoulder startled him out of his reverie. He turned to see a young page boy, clad in the livery of House Lannister, crimson and gold shining in the torchlight. The boy bowed awkwardly. "My lady the queen, your wife," the boy amended, flushing, "requests your presence in her solar." Ned studied the child's pale face. The boy looked frightened of him. Perhaps, Ned thought wearily, that came from the swirling rumors, that the Warden of the North was an unyielding man of pure steel, a stoic presence. Ned had no wish to terrify children. He forced a small, reassuring nod. "Very well. You may tell her I will come." When the boy had retreated, Ned cast a final glance out across the city. In the far distance, the glow of King's Landing stretched out like a sea of guttering lanterns, full of people who had no inkling how close the realm had come to plunging into anarchy. The chill of the stone beneath his hands bit at his palms, and he straightened, turning toward the corridor. A slight heaviness settled in his chest. He could still hear Catelyn's voice in his mind. What would she say if she saw him now? But the line of duty was drawn. He could not turn from it. He walked through the dim corridors until he reached Cersei's solar. The Lannister guards outside the door pulled it open, bowing stiffly. Inside, the room was bright with candlelight. Tapestries along the walls depicted golden lions chasing stags across green fields. A strange combination that once would have symbolized the union of House Baratheon and House Lannister, but which now seemed a mockery of Robert's memory. Cersei stood near a table of polished oak, her back turned. She wore a deep burgundy gown trimmed with gold thread, her golden hair meticulously arranged. She did not turn to acknowledge Ned's arrival until she heard the door close behind him. She offered a thin, cool smile. "Husband," she said. The word sounded like a barbed joke. Ned held himself with stoic reserve. "Your Grace." A short, brittle laugh escaped her. "Must we be so formal?" She gestured to the table, where a flagon of wine and 2 cups waited. "It is our wedding night, after all." A flicker of distaste, of grief, of guilt. Ned felt all of them surge through him. Was he truly to endure this farce? He stiffened. "What would you have me do?" Her eyes glittered. "The realm expects a show of unity. Lords from the Reach, from the Westerlands, from the Crownlands, they all look for cracks, for any sign this is a forced alliance. If they smell blood, if they sense weakness, we will both be undone. Or do you think your beloved Starks are safe?" He thought of Sansa, trembling in her new chambers in Maegor's Holdfast, uncertain of what the future might hold. He imagined Arya, caged in a city that was no home to her. He could not bear to think of Bran or Rickon or Robb in Winterfell, not knowing their father's fate. And Jon was somewhere along the wall or on his way to the blackness beyond it. Resignation clutched at him. He sighed and nodded. "You are right. We must show unity." Her mouth curved, though it was not quite a smile. "I appreciate your willingness to see reason, my lord." She poured wine into both cups, then offered one to him. "To the new rule," she said, voice dripping with irony. Ned accepted the cup, though he did not drink. He studied her as she took a long sip of the red. Cersei's face was poised and perfect as always, but tension lingered in her eyes, a vigilant brightness. She would never fully trust him, nor he her. But for better or worse, they were bound now, if only by the iron shackles of necessity. He set the cup down. "Where is Joffrey?" She studied him curiously. "He's in his own apartments with his sworn shield. He's adjusting to Robert's death in his own way." She did not elaborate. Cersei's children of incest, Ned reminded himself, were a critical piece of this uneasy puzzle. Joffrey was the recognized heir, though by rights Stannis Baratheon might have been the rightful king. But Ned had found no easy support for a claim that would tear the kingdom asunder. Cersei had used every resource at her disposal to quell any talk that Joffrey was not Robert's trueborn son. And as part of this uneasy settlement, Ned had been forced to put aside the question of inheritance. If he insisted on the truth, war would engulf them all. Cersei continued, "You wish to see him?" Ned measured his words. "I think it best that the boy grows used to my presence. After all, I'm the king's hand, Lord Protector of the realm until he comes of age. Her lips curled. Yes, you must guide him well. Though Joffrey is not always willing to be guided. Ned did not remark on that. There was little he could say about Joffrey's willfulness that wouldn't spark an argument. Instead, he stood in silence as he weighed how best to steer this night. He knew the courtiers were celebrating below, lords and ladies who wanted to see the shape of power in this new regime. Perhaps the realm would remain stable for a time. Perhaps. Tomorrow I will speak with the small council, he said. We need to start healing the divides that were opened by Robert's death and your father's maneuverings. Cersei's gaze sharpened. My father remains at Casterly Rock for now. But do not forget, Lord Stark, that House Lannister's gold and influence are the pillars on which the Red Keep stands. Tread carefully. He inclined his head. I've no intention of biting the hand that feeds the realm. But the North has resources too: iron, grain in good years, timber. And we command the loyalty of fiercely independent lords. So long as you remember that, we shall have peace. A beat passed in which each of them stood like statues, neither giving an inch, yet forced to acknowledge the precarious partnership. Then Cersei picked up her cup again, swirling the red wine. You may go now if you wish. I'm sure you'd rather not linger here longer than you must. Ned stiffened. She had thrown his own revulsion in his face, a blade aimed at his pride. But perhaps the best retort was simply to deny her the pleasure of seeing him wounded. I will remain a while, he said quietly. There is much we should discuss as man and wife. The future of our children, yours and mine. Her shoulders tensed. I see. Then sit, Lord Stark, and let us speak of the shape of tomorrow. He eased into a high-backed chair. Cersei remained standing, looming above him with a faint smirk. They began to discuss the day-to-day politics. Which lords needed appeasing, which might be a threat. They spoke of the betrothals that needed rearranging, particularly Sansa's, which had once been intended for Joffrey but was now a tangled question. They talked of the security of the city watch, the gold cloaks that had so readily turned on Ned at Littlefinger's urging. Littlefinger himself, slippery as ever, had emerged from Robert's death with new titles and new influence, though Cersei eyed him warily. None of this discussion came easily. Every question was a reminder of the battered hopes that had brought Ned from Winterfell. Each solution was steeped in the necessary cynicism of King's Landing. But somehow, in that small circle of candlelight, Ned found himself reflecting on the precarious calm they might manage to preserve. If the lords believed in the union of House Stark and House Lannister, if the new queen consort, if that was indeed what Ned was to be called, held the realm together, perhaps there would be no more bloodshed. At some point, Cersei poured herself yet another cup of wine. She drank deeply, the flush of alcohol tinting her cheeks. Ned refused the wine again, wanting a clear head. She eyed him with cold amusement. Do you fear I will poison you, my lord? No, he replied simply. But I need a clear mind. She let out a soft snort. You will find King's Landing far easier to stomach if you do not cling to clarity. Take it from me. He did not answer. Let her drink if she wanted. The night was thick with tension. When at last Ned rose from his seat, the candles burned low. Cersei flicked her gaze toward the bedchamber adjoining her solar. Shall I have a maid prepare the bed? She asked, voice laden with sarcasm. We are man and wife, after all. Perhaps the realm expects a true consummation. Ned's heart twisted painfully. He did not doubt that rumors swirled among the lords and ladies about whether this marriage would be real or only a ceremony. He had not yet banished the memory of Catelyn from his mind. He wondered if Cersei knew how humiliating, how hollow, this union was to him, but he forced himself to remain outwardly stoic. We can maintain separate chambers, he said. For decency's sake, you may say what you will to the realm about how we keep the marriage bed. She laughed harshly. The realm will invent its own stories anyway. Let them. I would not wish your presence in my bed, if I had a choice. He inclined his head. Then let us both be grateful we need not share it. Without waiting for her retort, he departed, walking stiffly from the solar and nodding to the guards. They saluted, fists to breastplates, their eyes betraying no emotion. As Ned retreated to his own new apartments, he could not shake the chill in his veins. He had made his choice. Now he had to abide by it. That night, sleep came fitfully. Memory invaded his dreams, carrying him back to the Trident, to Robert's rebellion, to the swirl of conflicts that had once brought them a measure of freedom from the Mad King. Strange how it had all led him here, forced to wed the daughter of the man who had been Hand of the King during that same rebellion. He saw flashes of his father's face, his brother Brandon's, their fiery ends at Aerys's hands. The ghosts of the past seemed to swirl around him, demanding to know what he had done with the Stark honor. When dawn finally arrived, Ned rose from the bed with a heaviness in his bones. He bathed and dressed in plain gray, rejecting the Lannister red. Then he stepped out into the corridor, determined to see his daughters if he could. Sansa would likely be in her new rooms. Arya, if the guards had not locked her in, might be roving the keep. He suspected they were both being closely watched. Still, he needed to reassure them that all was not lost, that he had not abandoned them. He found Sansa in a small, tastefully furnished chamber on an upper floor. She sat near the window, a piece of embroidery in her lap, but her eyes stared listlessly into space. When he entered, she started, and her face crumpled in relief. "Father," she whispered, rising so quickly that her embroidery fell to the floor. His heart lurched. He stepped forward, embracing her, feeling how she trembled in his arms. This was what he had bartered for, that Sansa and Arya might live, unmolested by the Queen's wrath. "Hush," he said, stroking her hair. "You are safe now. I promised you would be safe." Her eyes shone with tears. Is it truly over? Will they let us go home?" Ned tried to answer gently. "The city needs me, Sansa. I must serve as Lord Protector until the realm is stable. But in time, if the gods are good, we will see Winterfell again." She nodded, swallowing her tears. "Joffrey is to be king." Her voice shook. "People say that he hates you, that he hates me for being your daughter. He believes it is his right to do as he pleases now." Ned's jaw tightened. "Have you been treated poorly?" She shook her head. "I haven't seen him. The Queen, she made me move to these rooms with a guard outside. I think they're only letting me out under watch." A soft sniff. "And Arya, they won't let her come see me." Ned felt anger flaring in his chest. He forced it down with an effort. "I will speak with the Queen. You and Arya should not be kept apart. For now, do not antagonize Joffrey. Keep your composure. If he summons you, obey politely. But you are my daughter, Sansa. You have done no wrong. One day, if the gods are just, you will return to the north." Sansa nodded, tears spilling but unaccompanied by sobs now. She had grown older in these past weeks, Ned thought, too quickly. She was learning that the songs and tales of courtly romance were illusions. He stroked her hair one last time, then rose. "I will come again or send word. Keep your courage." With that, he left, guided by a Lannister guard who trailed him like a well-trained hound. They led him to Arya next, who, to Ned's surprise, was not in a cell but in a small courtyard practicing her footwork with a wooden sword. A pair of guards stood watch at the courtyard's edge, evidently allowing the girl to keep her old habit of training, perhaps because there was nowhere for her to run. "Father!" Arya cried out the moment she saw him. She threw down the wooden sword and ran over, her face bright with relief. She wore a simple tunic, her hair messy as ever. Ned smiled for the first time in what felt like days. He placed his hands on her shoulders. "You're well." She nodded vigorously. "They said I have to stay here, but they let me practice so long as I stay inside the walls. Some of the Lannister men laugh when they see me. One tried to take my sword." Her eyes glinted. "I threatened to poke him in the foot, and he let me be. Will we be going home now that the king is dead?" Ned's heart clenched. "Not yet, little one." She frowned. "But why not? Robert was your friend. Why should we stay where we're not wanted?" He sighed. How could he explain to her that they were hostages in all but name, even though he was nominally one of the most powerful men in the realm? "There are duties that hold me here," he said gently, "and you must remain safe. Promise me you'll keep out of trouble, no matter the provocation." Arya's face twisted. "I hate them," she muttered. "The Lannisters. They're cruel. They killed Jory, and I hate them." Ned gripped her shoulders. "No talk of hate now. Hate is a poison. Promise me you will do nothing reckless. Keep your head down, keep practicing, and wait." Arya pressed her lips together. "I promise," she said. Though Ned could hear the resentment simmering in her voice, she wanted to fight back. But she was only a girl. He kissed her forehead. "I'll see that you and Sansa can visit each other soon. Keep up your sword work, but keep your tongue sheathed as well. Please." She gave a curt nod. "All right." With that, Ned tore himself away, the ache in his chest growing. He crossed the courtyard, nodding stiffly to the guards who escorted him. The sense of being a prisoner in fine clothes clung to him. The day's duties pressed upon him. He summoned the small council to the Tower of the Hand, though Cersei insisted that they meet in the council chambers near the Great Hall, as was the custom. He conceded. One by one, the members arrived. Grand Maester Pycelle, hobbling with age. Littlefinger, with that perpetual smirk and flamboyant garb. Varys, sliding in with silent grace and offering half-bowed courtesies. Ser Barristan Selmy, still wearing his white cloak, though his expression suggested he was none too pleased with the new arrangement. Cersei arrived last, dressed in resplendent crimson and gold. Joffrey did not appear. He had not been invited, and Ned did not regret that. The boy's presence would only cloud the air with petulance. Cersei took her seat at the head of the table, while Ned settled to her right. They began discussing the immediate crisis, which lords demanded appeasement, what measures could keep the peace in the streets. The gold cloaks had been restive since Robert's funeral, and the city's merchants feared riots if bread prices continued to rise. Littlefinger spoke slyly of the need for alliances with the Lords of the Reach. "Mace Tyrell remains proud," he said, "but a proper show of respect from the crown might secure his loyalty." Varys nodded, fingertips pressed together. "Indeed, we would be wise to keep the Tyrells close. The same goes for the Dornish, who have long memories and will watch for any slight." Cersei flicked her gaze over them all. "We have gold," she said, "but we will not simply bribe every recalcitrant lord in the Seven Kingdoms. It's time we show strength as well, a demonstration of power. Make them understand that this new alliance between the North and the throne is unassailable." Ned set his jaw. "Perhaps," he said, voice calm, "but we must also show magnanimity. Brute force will only drive more lords to question the crown's legitimacy." She smiled thinly. "How wise of you, Lord Protector, and how do you propose we show this magnanimity?" Ned knew a trap when he heard it. Cersei was testing him. By reaching out with an offer of stable rule. Invite the lords to King's Landing for a grand feast or a council. Let them speak their minds, and assure them that the North stands with the crown. Remind them that we have no desire to disrupt their lands or incomes. Varys intervened, his voice quiet. "A splendid notion, my lord. The small folk love a celebratory event. It would reassure them to see you and the Queen so united." His dark eyes flicked to Cersei, then back to Ned. "We might arrange a tourney, perhaps, or a wedding feast if I might be so bold. Since the king's death, there has been no grand occasion to unify the realm." The mention of a wedding feast made Ned's stomach clench. The wedding itself had been performed quietly, with minimal ceremony. The idea of hosting a lavish celebration to flaunt his union with Cersei made him uneasy. He glanced at her, saw her tilt her head in consideration. She likely relished the chance to flaunt her power. "Yes," she said, "we could do that. A wedding tourney to celebrate my new marriage, to commemorate Robert's reign and usher in a new era. It would be costly, but we can afford it." All eyes shifted to Littlefinger, the master of coin, who wore a mirthless grin. "Well, we do have certain sums set aside for contingencies. Perhaps we could reallocate them for a royal tourney." Ned sighed inwardly. What a show of extravagance while the city starved. "We must ensure the small folk are cared for," he said. "Bread and feast days might serve us better than another expensive tourney." Cersei's eyes glittered. "We will do both, a gesture of generosity and a demonstration of splendor." Ned did not press further. This was what rule by Cersei Lannister would look like, pageantry and posturing. Yet, if it held the realm together, perhaps it was worth the coin. The council continued for hours, hashing out details. Ned could see Ser Barristan's face drawn with concern. The old knight spoke rarely, but he watched Ned with a hint of pity. Barristan had witnessed the wedding ceremony. The shame of it was not lost on him, but he too was bound by oath to the crown. At last, the session concluded. Ned left the council chamber, ignoring Littlefinger's knowing smirk and Pycelle's watery mutterings about the good of the realm. He stepped out into the corridor, half blinded by the bright sunlight streaming through the windows. The day had turned hot, as King's Landing often did, the air thick and stifling. He felt he could scarcely breathe. He wandered the halls of the Red Keep, footsteps echoing on marble floors, until he found a quieter corner near the garden. There, he paused to stare at the red and gold roses that had been planted, likely at Marjorie Tyrell's prompting when she had visited, or perhaps by some previous occupant. He felt a pang of longing for the crisp air of Winterfell, the smell of pine, the hush of the Godswood's reflection pool. There was no Godswood here, only a small courtyard with a heart tree that looked half sick under the southern sun. As he stood, half lost in thought, someone approached. The rustle of heavy skirts preceded a soft voice. "Lord Stark." He turned to see Marjorie Tyrell herself, escorted by a single lady-in-waiting. She wore a pale green gown that complemented her dark hair and lively brown eyes. Ned bowed politely. "My lady." She curtsied, then studied him with an earnest expression. "Forgive me for intruding on your solitude. The Queen has asked me to remain at court until we discuss certain marital alliances." Ned knew of the rumors swirling, that Marjorie Tyrell might be considered as a match for Joffrey, or else for Renly Baratheon if he pressed a claim. But for now, everything was uncertain. "I see," he said carefully. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Many of us are relieved that the realm will not descend into war, thanks to your cooperation, Lord Stark. The memory of the last rebellion is still fresh, even if it was a generation ago." He felt the sting in her polite words. This union was known to be forced or at least recognized as unusual. Some might see it as a betrayal of Robert's memory. Others viewed it as a necessary sacrifice to keep the peace. "I only do what I must," he said plainly. A flicker of sympathy crossed her face. She was clever, no doubt. "Sometimes, the gods place us in impossible positions," she said softly. "I remember what it was like when my grandmother told me of Robert's rebellion. So much blood was spilled. If you have spared the realm from another such fate, you deserve gratitude, not scorn." He gave her a measured nod. "You are kind to say so." Marjorie glanced around, as though wary of being overheard. Then she said, "I only wish we could ensure prosperity for all those who suffered in the war. My father has spoken of the impoverished in the Reach. Bandits roaming the roads, small folk barely scraping by. The crown could do much to help, if it were so inclined." Ned noted her emphasis. He realized that, for all her courtesy, Marjorie was here on behalf of House Tyrell, seeking favorable terms. "We will do what we can," he said, allowing a hint of warmth to enter his voice. She was not an enemy. She was an ambitious ally, perhaps. "Thank you, my lady, for your counsel." She smiled demurely. "I shall not detain you further. Good day, my lord." With that, she departed, her lady-in-waiting hurrying after her. Ned felt the swirl of politics tightening around him again. Each step he took in King's Landing introduced him to another subtle dance, another scheme or alliance that hinged on whether he could bring the North to heel for the crown, or whether Cersei would unleash her father's wealth for these alliances. That night, Ned sat alone in the bedchamber assigned to him as Lord Protector. A single candle burned on the table. He composed a letter to Robb in Winterfell, explaining that he had secured the safety of Sansa and Arya, that the realm was in uneasy peace for now. He dared not commit too much to parchment, but he tried to reassure his son that the North was not forgotten. He directed Robb to see to the harvest, to keep the vassals calm, and to be ready for any sign of aggression from the south. With the letter sealed, he resolved to find a loyal courier, someone not bought by Littlefinger or the Lannisters. That was no easy task. Several more days passed in a tense rhythm. Publicly, Ned appeared at Cersei's side for official functions, while she introduced him as "my Lord Husband, Lord Protector of the Realm." Courtiers clapped politely, though many cast suspicious or curious looks at Ned, as though they could not fathom how the proud Warden of the North had fallen into bed, or so they assumed, with the cunning lioness of Casterly Rock. Behind closed doors, the two of them spoke only of necessity. Cersei kept Joffrey close, grooming him to be the next king in the mold she preferred. Ned sometimes attempted to advise the boy, but Joffrey's open contempt was difficult to stomach. The boy glared at Ned whenever they crossed paths, though he rarely dared speak outright insults in front of his mother. Myrcella and Tommen, younger and less tainted by cruelty, treated Ned with a shy kind of courtesy, though they were surely confused by the situation. He tried to be gentle with them, for they were innocents in all this. Then came the day when Tywin Lannister himself arrived in King's Landing, riding at the head of a large host. Word reached the Red Keep at dawn. The Lion of the West had come to see this new arrangement for himself. Ned awaited the arrival in the courtyard by the main gates, clad in his stark gray, refusing to don any Lannister colors. Cersei stood near him in regal splendor, a faint smile on her lips, though tension radiated from her posture. The gates groaned open, and Tywin rode in, a tall man with broad shoulders, his pale green eyes scanning the courtyard. He wore gilded armor chased with lion motifs, a crimson cloak flowing behind him. His face, stern and inscrutable, showed neither surprise nor delight as he took in the sight of his daughter and her new husband. Behind him rode lords and knights of the Westerlands, accompanied by standard-bearers, their lion banners stirring in the breeze. Tywin dismounted with practiced ease. A stable boy rushed forward to take his horse's reins. For a moment, father and daughter regarded each other. Then Tywin gave a shallow bow of his head. "Your Grace," he said to Cersei, his voice echoing in the hushed courtyard. Cersei inclined her head in return. "Lord Father, I trust your journey was safe." "Entirely. I see our city remains standing." He shifted his gaze to Ned. For a moment, Tywin said nothing, those green eyes assessing. Finally, in a controlled tone, he said, "Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, I have come to offer my congratulations on your recent marriage." Ned returned a courteous bow. "Lord Tywin, I welcome you to the capital on behalf of the crown." Tywin studied him with the dispassionate air of a man eyeing a rival. "I suspect we have much to discuss." They adjourned to the Great Hall, where a formal welcome was made, and then retired to a more private chamber. Tywin's top bannermen took their leave, while a handful of Lannister guards accompanied them. Ned stood with Cersei at his side, facing Tywin, who had removed his armor to reveal a fine doublet of crimson velvet embroidered with gold thread. "So," Tywin said, "the realm has been spared a war for now. My daughter's letter was somewhat lacking in detail." His gaze flicked from Cersei to Ned. "Explain to me how this arrangement stands, and what remains to be resolved." Cersei, lips pressed thin, spoke in a controlled tone. "Robert is dead. Joffrey will inherit the throne as his recognized heir. Lord Stark has pledged to support the succession, and in return, I have agreed to a union binding House Stark to the crown. The city is at peace, though some might challenge the legitimacy if we are not careful. We plan a wedding tourney to shore up support and distract the small folk." Tywin's eyes turned to Ned. "And what of the North? Are your bannermen content to see you wedded to the Lannisters? Will they bow to Joffrey's rule?" Ned measured his reply. "They will if I command it. The North's loyalty belongs to House Stark, and that loyalty I have pledged to the Iron Throne, for now. My son Robb remains in Winterfell, ensuring no one acts rashly." Tywin's mouth curved in something like a half-smile. "You speak as though your pledge is conditional, Lord Stark." Ned did not shrink from the implied challenge, as is every oath in these times. "But I will stand by my word. I do not intend to undermine the peace." Tywin nodded thoughtfully. "Good. War is costly, and I have no desire to see the Westerlands bleed. This is a pragmatic arrangement. My daughter's hold on power is secure with your support, and you keep your kin safe. A wise trade." Cersei shot Ned a quick glance, as if to gauge his reaction. He only nodded, refusing to let Tywin's penetrating stare unsettle him. They discussed further details, ranging from the finances of the kingdom to the disposition of Lannister forces. Tywin was pointedly curious about the personal dynamics of the union, but he did not press too openly. Ned suspected Tywin wanted to see whether the marriage could produce a child of its own, a Stark Lannister heir that would cement the alliance. The thought curdled Ned's stomach. He kept his face stony. Cersei let nothing slip either. Soon after, Tywin took his leave. Once he was gone, Cersei exhaled softly, rubbing her temples. "My father is not pleased," she remarked in an undertone. "He wanted to secure the realm by other means, or so he told me in his letters. But I made the choice that best served House Lannister's immediate needs." Ned stood silent for a moment. "Your father is a shrewd man. If we give him no reason to doubt the stability of this alliance, he will support it." She turned to face him. "Indeed, which means we must maintain a united front, especially in front of my father. I trust you can manage that, my lord husband." Her tone was clipped, but not outright hostile. Ned gave a curt nod. "I will do what duty demands." That was all that needed saying. They parted ways, each to their own realm of influence in the Red Keep. The following weeks brought a careful routine. Ned oversaw day-to-day governance with the small council, settling disputes among lords, approving trade agreements, ensuring the gold cloaks were paid. Cersei appeared at court in regal fashion, hearing petitions alongside Ned. Together, they presented an image of unity that was passable, if not convincing to those who looked too closely at the tension in their eyes. Rumors abounded, of course. Some said the marriage was a sham, that Ned Stark kept to his own bed while the Queen had her lovers. Others insisted Ned Stark had become enthralled by Cersei's beauty, that the Northern Wolf had at last bowed to the lioness. The truth lay somewhere far more bitter, but the realm was content with illusions so long as bread was on their tables and the peace was kept. Meanwhile, the wedding tourney loomed. Preparations were extensive. Stands were erected near the city walls. Lists were marked. Knights arrived from every corner of the kingdom. Ned worried about the cost, the potential for chaos when so many armed men gathered in the capital. But Cersei insisted it would be a triumphant display of the throne's power. Tywin funded much of it, ensuring that House Lannister's coffers covered any shortfall from the crown's debt. As the day of the tourney approached, more and more lords poured into King's Landing. Among them was Renly Baratheon, newly self-styled Lord of Storm's End. He arrived with a retinue of handsome knights, drawing considerable attention from the ladies at court. There was talk that Renly might challenge the claim of Joffrey, but for now, he seemed willing to accept the new reality, especially given that Ned Stark was cooperating with the crown. Stannis Baratheon, the middle brother, remained at Dragonstone, silent and brooding as ever, some said. He had not answered the summons to attend. On the morning the tourney began, Ned rose before dawn and donned ceremonial garb. A doublet of gray emblazoned with the direwolf of House Stark, a short cloak of silver fur thrown over one shoulder. He paced the antechamber to the great hall, where he was meant to escort the queen. She arrived, pale and beautiful in a gown of crimson and gold, a lion wrought in delicate embroidery across the bodice. They exchanged tight-lipped greetings, then walked out together to the waiting carriage. The gold cloaks opened the palace gates, and they rode forth to the tourney grounds, Joffrey and his siblings following in another carriage, and Tywin behind them on horseback, flanked by his bannermen. The city streets teemed with onlookers, cheering. Some brandished Lannister banners, others cheered for the wolf and the lion, as though it were a new heraldic device. Ned felt a leaden sense of irony as he passed them. They wanted spectacle, an illusion of unity. Only the gods knew how long it would hold. At the tourney grounds, the stands were bedecked with streamers. Cersei took her seat in the royal box, with Ned at her side and Joffrey enthroned between them. Trumpets blared, announcing the start of the justs. Knights in gleaming armor trotted into the lists, their horses draped in the colors of their houses. The crowd roared as the heralds called out the names. Marjorie Tyrell was there, seated with her grandmother, the formidable Lady Olenna, who cast sharp glances at the royal box. Across the field, Renly presided with a retinue of Stormland knights. The justs commenced. Lances splintered, cheers rang out. Ned watched with distant interest, clapping politely for the victors. Joffrey leaned forward, enthralled by the violence and pageantry. Cersei glanced occasionally at Ned, assessing if he was playing his part. He kept his expression neutral. When the final tilt was concluded, the victor emerged. A young knight from the Westerlands, newly sworn to House Lannister's service. He bowed to the royal box, shouting praises to the Queen and to the new alliance. The crowd cheered. Joffrey stood and threw down a purse of gold to the knight, who caught it deftly. Then the feasting began, with tables laid out under pavilions, the sweet smell of roast boar mingling with the sweat of the throngs. Minstrels played lively tunes, and the common folk reveled in the large casks of ale provided by Tywin's coin. Amidst this celebration, Ned felt a hollow sense of dislocation. He sat beside Cersei while she offered gracious words to lords and knights who came by to pay their respects. He spoke a few polite phrases to each, though he sensed their curiosity. How was Ned Stark enduring this marriage? Many wanted to secure favor from both sides. Others lingered only a moment, as if uncertain whether to trust the Queen's new husband. At one point, Renly approached. He gave a sweeping bow, a faint smile playing on his lips. "My Queen, Lord Stark, a splendid day, is it not?" Cersei inclined her head. "Lord Renly, we are pleased to see you here." Renly's eyes flicked to Ned. "Your arrangement here has surprised many, but I must commend you for keeping the realm in peace." Ned accepted the comment with a nod. Renly's tone carried a gentle mocking undertone, as if he found it all quite entertaining. "Peace is a precious thing," Ned said. "We cannot squander it." Renly chuckled. "Indeed. Will you come visit me at Storm's End one day, my lord? I've no doubt we could speak more freely away from the capital." Ned narrowed his eyes slightly. Was Renly hinting at some potential alliance or intrigue? "If the realm's duties allow," he said noncommittally. Renly grinned, then gave another bow to Cersei and departed to mingle. The festivities dragged on. Wine flow. D freely. Cersei drank less than Ned had expected, maintaining a careful poise as if determined not to let her father or her foes see her indulging. Tywin made the rounds as well, ensuring that each Westerland's knight showed proper obeisance to the Queen and her new husband. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, a final flourish of horns signaled the end of the formal events. People began drifting back into the city or retreating to the pavilions and tents pitched along the outskirts. Ned rose to excuse himself. As he stepped away from the royal box, he heard a murmur of discontent from Joffrey, but the boy said nothing. Ned made his way through the throngs, ignoring the pointed stairs, until he found a quieter spot near the stables. There, the smell of horseflesh and straw was strong, but at least he was away from the cacophony. He needed a moment to gather his thoughts. A pair of stable boys hurried to and fro, leading lathered horses to the watering trough. A few knights in battered armor lingered, discussing the day's justs. Ned took a deep breath and let the tension slip from his shoulders. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember Winterfell in spring, the echo of wooden swords in the yard, the hush of the godswood. He heard footsteps. Turning, he saw Ser Barristan Selmy approaching, white cloak trailing in the dust. The old knight bowed respectfully. "My lord, I noticed you had left the dais. I thought I might offer my congratulations on maintaining the peace." Ned managed a faint smile for the old knight. "Thank you, Ser Barristan. though I suspect this peace is far more precarious than the realm thinks." Ser Barristan's eyes were grave. "Perhaps so, yet it is peace nonetheless. Far better than open war." Ned nodded. "Aye, we do what we must, for the sake of the people." A silence stretched between them. Then Barristan lowered his voice. "Lord Stark, if ever you find yourself in need of an honorable sword, you may call on me. I cannot break my vows to the crown, but I will not stand idly by if injustice is done. I served your friend Robert. I saw what was done to your men when you were arrested that day. I do not condone such actions." Ned felt a flicker of gratitude. "Thank you, Ser Barristan. Your honor is known to all." The old knight inclined his head, then took his leave, walking back toward the main tents. Ned watched him go, feeling at least a small measure of reassurance that not all good men had been snuffed out in King's Landing. He lingered by the stables a moment longer, then decided to return to the Red Keep before nightfall. The city grew rowdy on nights like these, filled with revelers and opportunistic thieves. Better to be within the castle walls. As he walked, he kept a hand near the hilt of his sword, mindful of the pickpockets and cut purses who might roam the crowd. But the gold cloaks were out in force, and no one accosted him. When at last he reached the keep, the gates swung open to admit him. A Lannister guard inside bowed stiffly and informed him that the Queen was in her solar, meeting with Lord Tywin and several lords from the Westerlands. Ned decided not to intrude. Let them plan their expansions of power. He went to check on Sansa and Arya instead. He found them in the small courtyard that Arya had commandeered for her practice. Sansa was watching, her eyes wide, as Arya attempted to spar with a straw dummy. Arya's face was flushed, sweat matting her hair to her forehead, but she moved with surprising grace. When she noticed Ned, she paused, raising the wooden blade in salute. "Father," Arya said, blinking sweat from her eyes. "Sansa came out to watch. She says it's unladylike." Sansa gave an awkward half-shrug. I just worry what people will say." Ned smiled, a genuine softness in his eyes. "They can say what they like." He ruffled Arya's hair. "I'm pleased you two are together. Is the guard giving you any trouble?" Sansa shook her head, though worry creased her brow. "They watch us, but at least they haven't forbidden Arya from practicing." Arya nodded, then gave the dummy a half-hearted strike. "I just want to be ready if anything happens." A pang of sadness coursed through Ned. His daughters had been forced to grow up too quickly in this viper's nest. But at least they had each other now. "You will be," he said gently. "But we must hope that day never comes. We have peace, for the moment." Arya rolled her eyes. "Peace," she said, as if the word tasted bitter. "How can it be peace when you had to marry that woman?" Ned's heart twisted. He did not want to burden Arya with the complexities of forced alliances. "It is complicated," he said, "but I did it to keep us all safe." Arya's gaze dropped. "I know," she muttered. I miss home." Sansa's eyes welled with tears again. "I do too." Ned drew them both into a fatherly embrace, ignoring the presence of the Lannister guards. The courtyard walls seemed too high, too claustrophobic. He murmured, "We will endure this, my girls. I swear it. And one day, if the gods are just, we will stand in Winterfell again." They clung to him for a moment, father and daughters, forming a small circle of warmth in a cold city. Then Ned stepped back. "The hour grows late. You should both rest." He escorted them back to their chambers, leaving each with a few words of comfort. Sansa tried to be brave, while Arya scowled, as though hating every moment of captivity. Still, they were alive, unhurt, sheltered under Ned's uncertain alliance. He had to hold on to that. Late that night, Ned found himself summoned to Cersei's solar. He felt the exhaustion of the day's events pulling at him, but he obeyed. The guards opened the door, and he found Cersei seated at a table, alone. A single candle burned, casting flickering shadows across her face. Her eyes were distant, a mostly empty goblet of wine at her elbow. She did not speak until the door was shut behind him. "What is it, Your Grace?" he asked quietly. She gave a low laugh, devoid of mirth. "So formal. I am your wife, am I not?" Ned braced himself. "In the eyes of the realm, yes." She took a slow sip of her wine, then set the goblet down, watching him from beneath half-lowered lids. "My father wishes me to ask you about children." Ned's throat constricted. "Children? Yes, our children. A child conceived in this marriage would cement everything in a way no one could question. A Stark Lannister heir for the throne, perhaps. Or if not the throne, then some high seat of future authority. My father believes it would quell any lingering doubts about our union." Ned felt revulsion coil in his belly. The entire notion was monstrous. He thought of Catelyn, how he had parted from her. This forced union was already a stain on his soul. To father a child on Cersei, a child who might be raised among Lannisters, was almost unthinkable. Yet in the pit of his conscience, he knew that Tywin was correct. A child would indeed make the alliance unbreakable. He found his mouth had gone dry. "I did not expect this question so soon." Cersei's gaze burned into him. "Nor did I. My father is ambitious, as you know." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "He would have me lie with you until my belly swells, so that the North and the West are forever joined." Ned's voice came out hoarse. "That child would be innocent of all this. Perhaps." She picked up the goblet again, swirling the wine. "But do not think I intend to bear another heir only to watch him or her become a hostage to your will." He stiffened. "I would never harm a child." She looked at him sidelong. "No, you would not. But that does not mean such a child would be safe. The realm devours children when it suits. Ask Elia Martell, or rather, you cannot. She is dead, and so are her children." A heavy silence. Ned could find no easy reply. His mind whirled with the gruesome realities of King's Landing. Finally, he managed, "I have no desire to father more hostages for this city to devour." Cersei laughed, a strained sound. "We are of one mind, then. But my father does not see it that way. He sees a future full of Lannister prosperity." She leaned forward, fixing Ned with a penetrating stare. "So tell me, husband, what shall we do?" He felt the pull of conflicting duties. The realm might indeed be more stable if they produced a child. Yet the very thought turned his stomach. For a moment he remained silent. At last he said quietly, "We maintain appearances. Let the realm believe we attempt to conceive. But if the gods are kind, it will never happen." Cersei's lips curved into a humorless smile. "You are a pragmatic man, Eddard Stark. Very well. We shall pretend for a time. Let the court whisper that we take to each other's bed. That will satisfy my father, and hush some of the gossiping lords." Ned nodded, though the taste of bile lingered in his throat. "Yes, let them believe what they will." She rose abruptly, smoothing her skirts. "Then we have an agreement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've had enough of this conversation." He inclined his head. "Of course, my lady." She flicked her gaze away, then stepped toward the door that led to her bedchamber. Before disappearing inside, she paused and looked back over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "Good night, Lord Stark." Then she was gone, and Ned stood alone in the candlelit solar. He heard the faint scratch of the door as it closed. The silence pressed on him. Slowly, he let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. This was to be his life now. Endless calculations, feigned intimacy, always walking on the razor's edge of mistrust. Still, he reminded himself, it was better than seeing Sansa's or Arya's head on a spike. A father's duty demanded he bear any burden to protect his children. Dousing the candle, Ned made his way back to his own chamber, footsteps echoing in the deserted corridors. Perhaps sleep would come this night, though likely it would be haunted by the same ghosts and regrets. He knew the path he walked was shadowed, but there was no turning back now. Days bled into weeks. The tourney aftermath saw a temporary burst of commerce in the city, coin changing hands rapidly. The small folk indulged in illusions of prosperity while new taxes were quietly levied. The lords and knights gradually trickled home, some well-pleased, others less so. The new status quo began to solidify. Joffrey as the boy-king-in-waiting, Cersei as the reigning power, Ned Stark as her husband and Lord Protector, Tywin Lannister looming in the background. Winterfell remained far away. Ned sent letters whenever he could, receiving short missives from Robb in return. The young wolf assured his father of the North's steadfast loyalty, but there was a tone of worry that bled through each line. Robb wrote of Theon Greyjoy's restlessness, of tensions with certain northern houses that whispered the marriage was an abomination. But so far, the North had not revolted. Ned prayed that would continue. In King's Landing, Ned strove to keep the peace. He brokered new trade deals, eased tensions between the faith and the crown, and tried to keep Joffrey's more cruel impulses in check. Cersei sometimes asked him to attend her in private, to discuss how best to quell rumors or punish traitors. On those occasions, they sat across from each other in candlelit chambers, planning how to maintain the illusion of a functional monarchy. If the conversation turned personal, both quickly withdrew behind walls of cold civility. They never shared a bed. A few times, they allowed the presence of a lady's maid or a guard at their chamber doors to conjure the illusion that they spent nights together. But once it was safe, Ned would slip away, or Cersei would retire elsewhere, ensuring that no child would result from their union. When the court whispered otherwise, or speculated that the queen might be with child, neither confirmed nor denied. Tywin pressed from time to time, but Cersei mastered the art of deflection. "The gods decide such matters," she would say, or "we must be patient," and so the realm trudged on under this charade. The fear of war began to fade from everyday talk, replaced by the usual petty intrigues of court. Merchants complained about taxes, lords jockeyed for positions of influence, and the small folk endured. One afternoon, Ned was in the castle library, searching through old records on the lineages of houses Targaryen and Baratheon, hoping to glean any clue that might help him manage the question of Stannis's claim. Though he had been forced to set aside his accusations about Joffrey's parentage, the truth had not left him. He dreaded the day Stannis might decide to march with a fleet of ships from Dragonstone, proclaiming himself the rightful king. The realm would tear itself apart. A soft footstep made him look up. It was Varys, gliding between the shelves like a spider. The eunuch bowed. "My Lord Protector, I see you are hard at work even now." Ned closed the tome. "You surprise me, Lord Varys." Varys smiled sweetly. "I live to serve. I had hoped to speak with you about certain information." Ned gestured for him to continue. Varys leaned in, lowering his voice. "Whispers have reached me that Stannis Baratheon may be gathering support in secret. I do not know if it is enough to launch a war, but there is discontent among certain lords who see Joffrey as unfit." Ned felt his pulse quicken. "Which lords?" "I cannot say with certainty. Perhaps some in the Stormlands, possibly some in the Vale. Not all are as easily swayed by gold as we might wish." He tapped a finger to his lips. "If you wish to preserve peace, it may be wise to extend an olive branch to Lord Stannis before matters escalate." Ned frowned. "And how would we do that?" Varys shrugged elegantly. "Invite him to court, offer him a place on the small council. Show him that he is valued. Make him feel that, though he is not seated on the throne, he remains close to power. It may soothe his pride." Ned knew Stannis. Pride was not easily assuaged. "I will speak with the queen." Varys dipped his head in a short bow. "Excellent. Think on it, my lord, and I shall remain at your disposal. The realm is large, and the little birds sing many tunes." With that, the master of whisperers slipped away, leaving Ned alone among the dusty ledgers. Stannis's ambitions were a threat he could not afford to ignore. He hated the idea of further compromise, of more half-truths to keep the realm from war. But the alternative was a clash that might tear Westeros apart. Ned sighed heavily and placed the tome back on the shelf. He went to find Cersei. She was in the throne room, instructing the gold cloaks to arrange a ceremony the next day for the swearing of new knights. A line of supplicants stood, waiting for her attention. Ned noticed with some grim amusement that the queen had taken to sitting on the Iron Throne itself, not because she was officially crowned, but because Joffrey, in his youth, often grew bored and wandered off. She embraced the posture of a ruling monarch far more easily than Robert ever had. He approached, ignoring the curious stares of lesser lords. Cersei acknowledged him with a minute tilt of her head. "My lady," Ned said quietly, once the current supplicant had departed. "We must speak." She beckoned a Lannister guard to hold the line of petitioners. Then she rose and descended from the throne, guiding Ned aside to a recessed alcove out of earshot. "What is it?" she asked. He relayed Varys's warning about Stannis, keeping his voice low. Cersei's expression grew taut. "I see. So the spiders whisper that Stannis is on the move." Ned nodded. "We cannot ignore it. If he gathers enough men, war is inevitable." Cersei's eyes flashed. "Then we must crush him before he can muster his forces." Ned tensed. "And risk open conflict? That could drive other lords to his side, if they see the throne as tyrannical. Better to attempt negotiation first, invite him to court, offer him a position." She sneered. "Stannis despises half measures. He knows the truth of Joffrey's parentage, does he not?" Ned lowered his voice further. "He does. That is why we must move carefully. If we force his hand, he will reveal it to the realm. He might have evidence. Then we are undone." Cersei pursed her lips, a muscle in her jaw twitching. "Very well. We will extend an invitation, feign courtesy. But if he refuses—" She let the words hang, heavy with threat. Ned exhaled. "Yes, let us hope it does not come to that." She nodded, then returned to the throne without another word. Ned took his leave, his mind churning. Each day, he felt like he was balancing the realm on a knife's edge. He had sacrificed so much, his honor, his peace, his marriage to Catelyn, for this uneasy stability. If Stannis forced a war, all that sacrifice would be for naught. Time would tell. And so, under the shadow of potential conflict, Eddard Stark and Cersei Lannister continued their charade of unity, forging a fragile alliance that bound the North to the Iron Throne. The city thrived on gossip and spectacle, from tournaments to feasts, while the cunning machinations of lords and ladies unfolded behind closed doors. Sansa and Arya remained under guard, but they had each other and their father's presence to keep them safe. Far to the north, Robb Stark managed Winterfell with sober diligence, awaiting any word that might call him south with an army. Tywin Lannister watched every move, carefully expanding his influence, while Stannis Baratheon loomed as an ominous threat on the horizon. Through it all, Ned carried the weight of his choices, day by day, night by night, wondering if this forced marriage would indeed avert the fires of war, or merely delay an inevitable storm that would one day break over the Seven Kingdoms in a cataclysm of blood and betrayal. For now, though, the realm had peace, if one could call it that, and Eddard Stark did what he had always done: bear the burden of duty, for the sake of those he loved, and for the countless souls who might otherwise be lost to the flames of civil war. The wolf lay beside the lion, uneasy companions, hoping that neither would bare its fangs before the other. And so Westeros moved forward under this delicate, improbable alliance, blind to the gathering storms beyond its shores.